Think about the last time you saw someone completely insulate themselves from the consequences of their own actions.
Right.
And I don't mean just, avoiding a speeding ticket or something. I mean walking away from a cataclysmic, world-altering
Oh,
failure.
yeah, the big stuff.
Exactly. The
Yep.
kind of failure that bankrupts communities, uh, rewrites the social contract, and alters the trajectory of an entire generation.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that scale, honestly.
It is. Now, imagine the architects of that very crisis, the people actually pulling the levers of power, walking away not just unharmed, but actively enriched.
Right, like they're failing upward.
Yes, exactly. They get, book deals, lifetime security details, victory laps on cable television, all while the everyday people who were forced to bear the weight of those decisions are left standing in the wreckage of their careers.
It's a viscerally infuriating concept. I mean, it strikes at something really primal in our psychology, you know? Well, we're basically wired to expect reciprocity. We look for some basic equation where accountability flows toward the people with the most power.
Right. The buck stops at the top.
Exactly. And when you invert that, when the architects are shielded and the everyday citizens are penalized, you get a very specific, very potent kind of societal rage.
Yeah, and that simmering, really deep-seated sense of systemic betrayal is, it's the engine driving the material we are unpacking today.
Absolutely.
We are looking at a highly specific, very charged transcript for this deep dive. It's from a Tucker Carlson monologue, and it aggressively critiques Dr. Anthony Fauci's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic.
And it really goes after him, right? Tearing into his public persona and, incredibly, his private diaries.
Yeah, the diaries are a huge part of this. And then the transcript shifts into a really lengthy interview with a dissenting Houston physician. Her name is Dr. Talley Bowden.
Right.
And she describes what she believes is a catastrophic medical cover-up happening right now inside everyday clinics.
And, before we really get into the weeds of this, we need to be crystal clear about our objective for you, the listener.
Definitely.
We aren't here to adjudicate the medical science, and we certainly aren't here to endorse a political worldview.
No, not at all.
Our job today is to dissect the anatomy of this specific narrative. We want to understand how this sweeping populist critique is built.
Right, to look at the mechanics of the argument.
Exactly, because Carlson and Bowden are basically arguing that our public health bureaucracy, our media apparatus, and our medical culture have fused into this unaccountable monolith.
A monolith, yeah. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because no matter where you fall on the ideological spectrum, understanding how trust in core institutions completely disintegrates is vital.
It really is. It affects all of us.
And what's fascinating is that Carlson doesn't start his critique with, epidemiological data or infection fatality rates.
No, he goes in a completely different direction.
He starts with ancient philosophy. He literally opens by invoking the biblical book of Ecclesiastes.
Which is, honestly, a brilliant rhetorical move if your goal is to elevate a contemporary political grievance into an epic moral struggle.
Yeah, because it's not just a policy disagreement then.
Right. Ecclesiastes contains this ancient, really profound lament about cosmic injustice. It's the writer looking at the world and being deeply frustrated by seeing the wicked thrive.
Seeing the bad guys get what the good guys deserve.
Exactly. The wicked get what the righteous deserve, and the righteous suffer and get what the wicked deserve.
Right.
So by anchoring his monologue there, Carlson is basically telling his audience, the frustration you feel isn't just about a bad policy, it's a spiritual rot.
Wow.
He's saying the universe is fundamentally out of balance right now.
He is basically saying that the bad guys won. And he provides very specific avatars to represent this broken reality.
Right. He names names.
Oh, yeah. On the side of the allegedly wicked who are thriving, the monologue points straight at figures like Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci.
Okay, so how does he frame Gates?
Well, he argues that Gates faces zero penalty for his massive influence over global health policies, that he operates like a sovereign head of state.
So he's treated like a visiting dignitary by world leaders.
Exactly. And this is despite Carlson explicitly labeling him an enemy of our civilization. But, the true focal point, the guy sitting at the very top of what Carlson calls the ugly pyramid of COVID, is Fauci.
And to really make that sense of injustice land, you have to contrast that untouchable elite with the suffering everyman, right?
Right, you need that juxtaposition.
And the narrative doesn't rely on abstract economic statistics to do this. It gets super granular. Carlson frames the victims as the absolute, quote, best people in our society.
Who does he mean by that?
He points to the family business owners who were forced into bankruptcy, while corporate leviathans, I mean, he names Amazon, Netflix, Airbnb, basically gobbled up historic
Yeah,
profits.
the wealth transfer during that time was insane
It was. And then he talks about the nurses who worked through the initial terrifying wave of the virus, only to be fired months later.
because of the mandates.
Exactly. The firemen, the local cops, the enlisted Navy SEALs, these are highly symbolic professions, you know?
Right, they represent the backbone of the community.
Yeah. These are people who lost their livelihoods, their pensions, their social standing, simply because they refused to comply with the vaccine mandates.
So it is a deliberate, stark contrast. You have the unfeeling bureaucratic monolith on one side and the working class everyman being crushed in the gears on the other.
That's the framing. Yeah.
And what is the reward for the people running the monolith? According to this text, it is total, absolute immunity.
Which is where he brings in the president, right?
Yes. Carlson claims that Fauci essentially received a blanket pardon from President Joe Biden for any potential crimes.
A blanket pardon. Wow.
Yeah. And he talks about Fauci securing a sinecure, like a prestigious, low-effort academic post at Georgetown University, which, by the way, Carlson dismissively waves off as a CIA cutout.
Of course he does.
But the detail that really sticks is the security. Carlson paints this vivid picture of Fauci enjoying lifetime Secret Service protection.
Right, the bodyguards.
Yeah, walking his dog through Glover Archbold Park in Washington, D.C., completely surrounded by federal bodyguards paid for by the very taxpayers he supposedly ruined.
That image, the bodyguards in the park, that is doing a lot of heavy lifting for the narrative.
How so?
Well, if we connect this to the broader history of populist movements, what we're looking at is the classic framing of the insulated elite.
Okay, break that down for me.
In this worldview, bureaucracy is not some neutral administrative tool used to organize a complex society. Bureaucracy is an active defensive shield.
It's a weapon, basically.
Or a fortress. It's a system engineered by the mediocre to protect themselves from real-world consequences. So those federal bodyguards are a literal physical manifestation of that isolation.
I see.
The bureaucrat is walled off, untouchable, entirely insulated from the citizen whose life was dismantled by his edicts.
But, let me challenge that premise for a second. We're looking at a massive restructuring of American life, right? Businesses forcibly closed, mandates pushed from the federal level down to local municipalities, the economy intentionally put on ice.
Yeah, it was unprecedented.
So is Carlson arguing that this was a villainous conspiracy, like intentional malice to destroy the middle class? Or is he describing the blind, lumbering momentum of a massive government bureaucracy just doing what bureaucracies do, panicking and overreaching?
That's a great question, and Carlson actually straddles that line. It's where the narrative gets quite complex.
Okay, explain that.
On one hand, he uses highly charged language. He calls the pandemic response a true disaster and claims the people in charge lie about everything.
That sounds pretty intentional.
It does. He explicitly alleges that Fauci knew the virus originated in a Wuhan lab and orchestrated a cover-up, and that he lied about the efficacy of the mRNA shots. That implies active, intentional malice.
Right, that's not just a mistake.
No, but simultaneously, Carlson roots this malice in a profound systemic mediocrity.
Mediocrity, how does that work?
He argues that the American media establishment worships these bureaucrats because journalists are, in his words, weak and fearful people.
Ouch.
Yeah. He says they are terrified of crisp, clear, individual decision-making. They love the committee. They love the consensus.
Ah, so they hide behind the group.
Exactly. So the malice is almost a byproduct of an arrogant, unaccountable system where no one person ever has to say, I take full responsibility for this failure.
Which sets up this incredible tension. Because if the premise is that the bureaucrat is perfectly insulated by this system, what happens when you drag them out of the park, put them in a chair, and demand answers under oath?
Right, when the shield comes down.
Exactly. The transcript moves to a Senate Homeland Security Committee hearing where Senator Rand Paul managed to subpoena Fauci.
And specifically, they subpoenaed his diary, didn't they?
Yes, his personal diary, which incredibly he kept on government servers.
That detail, the diary on the government server, is vital to Carlson's psychological profile of Fauci.
Why is that? I mean, it's terrible IT practice, obviously.
Definitely terrible IT. But from a psychological perspective, Carlson uses it to argue that Fauci had completely lost the ability to distinguish between himself as a private citizen and himself as the state.
Oh, wow. He merged with the institution.
Exactly. He used taxpayer-funded servers for his private ruminations because in his mind, he was the institution. There was no boundary.
That's wild. But the actual hearing is where the narrative tries to completely shatter Fauci's aura of omnipotence.
Tell me about the hearing.
The exchange detailed in the transcript is almost surreal. It reads like a bizarre piece of performance art. Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri is questioning Fauci.
Okay.
And Hawley doesn't open with a complex interrogation about viral mutations or gain-of-function research. According to Carlson, Hawley asks Fauci for the day of the week.
Wait, literally, the day of the week.
Literally. And Fauci, sitting next to his legal counsel, leans over, confers, and invokes his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination.
You're kidding. Over the day of the week.
I am not kidding. So Hawley pivots. He asks Fauci what color his tie is. Fauci takes the fifth. Hawley asks what color the carpet is in the hearing room. Again, Fauci takes the fifth.
Okay, if you look at this purely through the lens of legal strategy, it actually makes a kind of cynical sense.
Really? How?
Well, the Fifth Amendment is designed to protect individuals from being forced to testify against themselves, right?
Right.
If you walk into a highly adversarial hearing where you firmly believe the committee's sole objective is to trap you in a perjury charge, a defense attorney will often build an absolute firewall.
So they just shut everything down.
Exactly. The legal logic is that if you answer even one seemingly innocuous question, like the day of the week, opposing counsel could argue you've opened the door and waived your Fifth Amendment rights regarding other, more contextual questions.
Ah, I see. So the lawyer says, you plead the fifth to everything. You do not give them an inch.
Right. It prevents any verbal inconsistency that could be twisted into a false statements charge.
Okay, I understand the legal mechanics of the firewall. But the optics of that firewall, they are absolutely brutal.
Oh, they're terrible.
Yeah. Carlson doesn't look at this and say, wow, what a shrewd legal maneuver. He uses this exact exchange to paint Fauci as weak, diminished, and pathetic.
What does he say?
He calls him a terrified old man and a tiny man. Carlson tells his audience, imagine participating in a display like that. Imagine humiliating yourself like that.
So he's attacking his character, his masculinity, basically.
Totally. The argument is that a truly strong, independent leader, a man of real conviction, would look at Hawley and say, don't be ridiculous. I'm not a robot. It's Wednesday and my tie is blue.
Right. They brush it off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But instead, America's top doctor has to beg his lawyer for permission just to acknowledge reality.
That is the deliberate destruction of the mastermind persona right there. Carlson is pulling back the curtain very much like the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, that's a good comparison.
And he's telling the listener that when you look behind the machinery of the pandemic response, you don't find a grand, all-powerful dictator. You find someone who is fundamentally afraid.
Just a bureaucrat.
Exactly. You find a functionary, a guy who reads a canned, robotic legal phrase because he lacks the personal autonomy or, the raw courage to engage in a genuine clash of ideas.
But hold on, we have to talk about the massive contradiction here.
Okay, what is it?
For years, massive segments of the populist right have portrayed Anthony Fauci as a diabolical global mastermind, right?
Oh, absolutely, the puppet master.
Exactly. The architect of a shadow government pulling the strings on bioweapons, orchestrating a new world order, forcing billions into compliance.
Right.
But suddenly in this monologue, Carlson is going out of his way to diminish him. He calls him a middling IQ guy, a beta male, someone who couldn't even organize a dinner party.
That's quite a pivot.
It is. How does this narrative reconcile the idea of an apocalyptic global threat with a bumbling, insecure, low IQ bureaucrat?
Carlson reconciles it by leaning into a very specific analogy and invoking one of the most famous philosophical concepts of the 20th century.
Okay, what's the analogy?
The analogy he uses is Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh.
Right. Carlson points out that for years, the public imagined Epstein as this dark, sophisticated genius, a geopolitical puppet master holding the secrets of the global elite.
Yeah, like a Bond villain.
Exactly. But when Epstein's private correspondence actually leaked, he didn't sound like a Bond villain. He sounded, in Carlson's words, like a middling IQ guy from Brooklyn.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. And Carlson makes sure to point out that Fauci is, quite literally, the son of a pharmacist from Brooklyn.
So it's the terrifying realization that the people running the world aren't actually that smart. The incompetence is scarier than the malice.
Exactly. And the philosophical framework Carlson explicitly names to explain this is the banality of evil.
Hannah Arendt, right?
Yes, coined by Hannah Arendt. She covered the trial of Adolf Eichmann, one of the primary logistical organizers of the Holocaust. And when Arendt saw Eichmann in Jerusalem, she was shocked. She expected a sociopathic monster, a raving anti-Semite dripping with malice.
And what did she find?
She found a profoundly dull, unimaginative bureaucrat, a careerist.
Just a guy doing paperwork.
Exactly. A man whose primary motivation was simply moving up the ranks and following the rules of his system, entirely divorced from the horrific moral consequences of the paperwork he was processing.
Wow. And Carlson is applying that to Fauci.
He is mapping that exact concept onto Fauci. He is arguing that the devastation of the COVID era wasn't the result of dark genius. It was HR department evil.
HR department evil. That's a chilling phrase.
It was the result of deep, unquestioning mediocrity armed with the awesome power of the state.
And to prove this thesis of deep mediocrity, to prove that Fauci's internal life was completely detached from the public health catastrophe, Carlson dives directly into the contents of that subpoenaed diary.
The famous diary on the government server.
Exactly. We are looking at entries spanning from May 2020, which is the explosive, terrifying beginning of the pandemic, all the way into the summer of 2022.
Right.
And if you were expecting the private diaries of the nation's top infectious disease expert to be filled with complex ruminations on spike protein mutations or epidemiological modeling or the tragedy of the death toll, you were going to be surprised.
So what's actually in there?
According to this transcript, the diary is overwhelmingly, almost exclusively preoccupied with media appearances, cable news hits, and his own skyrocketing fame.
You're kidding.
I'm not. Carlson pulls out specific entries to build this psychological profile. The first one he highlights is from May 21st, 2020.
Okay, I want to set the context for that date for you listening. In May 2020, the country is in full lockdown.
Absolute panic.
Economic panic is astronomical. People are dying in hospitals, isolated from their families. The world is on fire.
Right. And on that day, Fauci sits down and writes about a flattering profile of himself in the Washington Post. He writes, quote, "The situation with my national and the international fame is explosive and really unimaginable." He goes on to declare, "I am the most famous and talked about person in the country and one of the most recognizable people in the world."
It is surreal to hear that read aloud.
It really is. He even takes time in that entry to brag about his VIP treatment. He writes about how the Secret Service lets him into the first gate at the White House without even checking his ID, and how everyone is just so worried about his personal health and welfare.
And how does Carlson react to that?
He is just dripping with contempt when he reads this. He compares it to the diary of a 15-year-old girl.
That's brutal.
Yeah. The core argument here is that while the American public was facing the gravest crisis of their lifetimes, the guy steering the ship was primarily obsessed with his own celebrity status.
And you know, the obsession with media validation is a running theme here. Carlson cites another entry from October 23, 2020.
Right before the election.
Exactly. This is weeks before a deeply contested presidential election. Fauci writes about having a private dinner at his home with CNN anchor Jake Tapper and his wife, Jennifer.
Wait, he's having dinner with a CNN anchor while everyone else is locked down.
Yeah, he notes it was a relaxed, enjoyable evening and then explicitly records a piece of political gossip in the diary. He writes, "Jake clearly believes that Trump is totally nuts."
Okay, so he's gossiping.
Right. Now, Carlson uses this entry to highlight something very specific. The incestuous symbiotic relationship between the legacy media and the bureaucratic elite.
Because they're supposed to be adversaries, right?
Exactly. The media's theoretical job is to ruthlessly question power. Instead, you have the top anchor at CNN having high-tone Georgetown salon dinners with the top bureaucrat, validating each other's political biases in private.
Carlson says the media was, quote, assiduously sucking up to him. They weren't journalists, they were courtiers.
That's a great word for it.
And this desperate need for media adoration apparently cuts both ways, because when the media turns on him, the reaction is intense.
Oh, when does that happen?
We jump to June 18th, 2022. By this point, Fauci has contracted COVID-19. He's fully vaccinated, he is double boosted, and he still gets sick.
Right, which happened to a lot of people.
Yeah. And apparently, Tucker Carlson did a television segment criticizing him for this, pointing out the hypocrisy since Fauci had originally assured the public that the vaccines would prevent infection entirely.
Okay, so what did Fauci write about that?
Fauci's diary entry regarding this is remarkably petty. He writes, "The usual stuff is going on regarding my infection, with Tucker Carlson doing a 5 or 10-minute discussion tearing me down."
And then,
Then he writes, "What a total asshole. What a total asshole." 2 exclamation points.
wow. So Carlson analyzes this not just as a funny anecdote, but as absolute proof of profound narcissism and deep-seated insecurity.
Right, because a serious leader wouldn't care.
That's his argument. He says a true scientist, a serious leader facing a crisis, would be using their private time to analyze why the vaccine failed to prevent transmission and how to honestly address the public's completely valid concerns about efficacy.
Instead of whining about a TV host.
Exactly. Instead, Carlson paints Fauci as, and this is his phrase, a bitchy old woman who is exclusively obsessed with, who is flattering him on television, and who is criticizing him.
It's all about the optics.
The transcript even points out Fauci's fondness for Alyssa Farah, a White House communications staffer, suggesting he liked her simply because she constantly encouraged him to do more TV hits.
So the conclusion Carlson draws is pretty devastating. He says Fauci's overriding primary concern was maintaining his fame, not achieving a public health objective.
That's the core of his critique.
But, I'm going to push back on Carlson here, because I think we need a reality check on human nature.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate.
Yeah, let's do it. If you or I, or literally anyone listening to this, suddenly became the most famous person on planet Earth at the age of 80.
Unlikely, but go on.
Right. But if your face was suddenly printed on prayer candles, if Brad Pitt was playing you on Saturday Night Live, if you couldn't walk outside without a security detail, wouldn't you write about how incredibly weird and surreal that is in your private diary?
It would be bizarre, yeah. You'd have to process it somehow.
Exactly. Dr. Bowden, the physician interviewed later in this very transcript, makes a really fair point about this.
Yeah.
She says diaries are often just a psychological pressure valve, a place to vent.
Right, just to get it out.
She speculates he probably couldn't vent to his wife anymore without driving her crazy, so he wrote it down. Isn't Carlson just weaponizing a very normal human coping mechanism? Is it actually fair to judge a man's entire professional competency based on his private emotional venting?
That is the exact tension between privacy and public accountability right there. Yes, it is entirely normal for a grandfather to vent, to be petty about a TV host, to be bewildered by sudden fame.
Right, he's human.
But here is where Carlson, and frankly the expert class's critics, push back hard. Fauci wasn't just a grandfather watching TV. He was the man steering the global economy and the health of 330 million Americans. Carlson's point is that it is fundamentally not normal for the man managing a civilization-altering crisis to care more about a CNN anchor's dinner party gossip than the collateral damage of his mandates.
Ah, I see. So it's about priorities.
Carlson isn't critiquing vanity in a vacuum. He is arguing that this vanity blinded the pilot while the plane was going down.
That's a great metaphor.
When you have the power to shut down schools, bankrupt businesses, and mandate experimental medical treatments, the public has a right to know what is calibrating your internal compass.
And what does Carlson think was calibrating it?
He's arguing that Fauci's compass wasn't calibrated to public health data, it was calibrated to cable news ratings.
And that transition from the internal vanity of the diary to the external reality of policy is where this narrative gets explosive.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when a bureaucrat who completely believes his own press clippings, who lives in this insulated echo chamber of media adoration, suddenly steps out into the real world and tries to force his mandates onto a skeptical public, well, things get very messy very fast.
Reality hits.
Exactly. And the transcript illustrates this culture clash with a highly specific, totally fascinating anecdote about a confrontation on the streets of Washington, D.C.
Right, the D.C. trip. Carlson describes a trip Fauci took with Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C.
Where did they go?
They go into a predominantly black neighborhood in southeast D.C. The stated goal of this PR trip is to combat vaccine hesitancy on the ground.
Like a public outreach campaign.
Yeah, but Carlson frames the entire expedition with heavy sarcasm. He characterizes the liberal, bureaucratic mindset driving the trip as this paternalistic arrogance, the belief that, the blacks love me, I'm a hero to the blacks.
Oof.
He paints Fauci and the mayor as these enlightened elites swooping into the inner city to save the poor, uneducated locals from their own ignorance and right-wing misinformation.
But the reality on the ground shatters that illusion instantly, doesn't it?
Completely.
Carlson plays audio from this trip, featuring an unnamed black resident confronting Fauci and the mayor. And what is so striking is that this resident is not reciting QAnon conspiracies.
No, he's not talking about microchips.
He's not talking about 5G towers or microchips. He is incredibly articulate, and he aggressively questions the basic timeline of the pharmaceutical rollout.
What exactly does he say?
He looks at Fauci and says, quote, "It takes years to create a vaccination. 9 months is definitely not enough for nobody to be taking no vaccination that you all came up with."
I mean, it's a purely rational logistical objection.
It totally is. And he doesn't stop there. He immediately deconstructs the psychological tactics being used by the public health apparatus.
He mentions the incentives, right?
Yeah. He points out that the government is running lotteries, paying people, and offering incentives to take the shot. His argument is that if a medical intervention is purely for your health and demonstrably safe, you don't need to bribe people to take it.
That's a very fair point.
He looks right at them and says, your campaign is about fear. It's about inciting fear in people. In 60 seconds, a guy on the street dismantles the entire public health messaging strategy.
And Carlson uses this interaction to make a very sharp, very uncomfortable point about race, class, and the nature of skepticism.
Right, because the narrative was always that skepticism was just a right-wing thing.
Exactly. For months, the media narrative was that vaccine hesitancy was a product of right-wing echo chambers and Russian disinformation. But Carlson points out that urban Black vaccination rates were notoriously low in the beginning.
And why does he say that is?
He argues it wasn't because of Tucker Carlson, it was because of logical, historically grounded skepticism. When you look at the history of the medical establishment's relationship with Black Americans, think of Tuskegee, skepticism isn't ignorance, it's a survival mechanism.
Wow, yeah?
Carlson argues this unnamed man was simply looking at the obvious reality. The product was rushed, the long-term data didn't exist, and the government was demanding compliance through fear and bribery.
And the most important part of this antidote is how Fauci reacts, or rather, how he fails to react.
He just ignores it.
Completely. Carlson points out that because Fauci is so heavily insulated by his narcissism and his bureaucratic echo chamber, the resident's words completely bounce off him.
Like water off a duck's back.
Carlson says this encounter caused Fauci, quote, not a moment of actual self-reflection. It simply did not compute in Fauci's brain that a working-class citizen without a medical degree could have a valid, rational, empirical objection to his policy.
Because they're just supposed to listen to him?
Right. Fauci's worldview doesn't allow for peasant dissent. And Carlson uses this street-level arrogance to explain how Fauci handled criticism on a macro level. Which brings us to arguably the most famous and controversial interview Fauci ever gave, his sit-down with Chuck Todd.
Yes, this is the defining moment of the critique. In that interview, Chuck Todd asks Fauci about the intense, growing political pushback he is receiving from the public and from lawmakers.
And Fauci's response?
His response, which is quoted directly in the transcript, is staggering. He says, "A lot of what you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science, because all of the things that I've spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science."
Wow.
So basically, if you criticize Anthony Fauci, you are criticizing the very concept of science itself.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Carlson compares this statement to Louis IV stuff.
The French king.
Yes, Louis IV, the absolute monarch of France, famously supposedly declared, "L'État, c'est moi, I am the state." The monarch and the nation are one inseparable entity.
Right.
Carlson is arguing that in this interview, Fauci essentially declared, "I am science."
It's an incredibly dangerous rhetorical leap, and we really need to dig into the philosophical implications of this because Carlson hammers it.
Okay, let's break it down.
The scientific method, fundamentally, is a process of asking questions, forming hypotheses, rigorously testing them, failing, and welcoming dissenting data to refine the truth. It requires skepticism.
It's about proving yourself wrong.
Exactly. So at what point does public health messaging abandon the scientific method and mutate into what Carlson calls a dogmatic religion, a system where the expert is deemed infallible and questioning his edicts is treated not as a scientific inquiry, but as literal heresy?
That mutation is the philosophical core of Carlson's entire argument. He states very clearly that science is the exact opposite of the phrase, "because I said so."
Right. Science is supposed to be humble.
Yes, a humble, iterative method for arriving at provable truths about the material world. But Carlson argues that during the COVID-19 pandemic, science ceased to be a method and was weaponized into a political bludgeon designed to force mass compliance.
It became faith-based.
Exactly, a faith-based system. The Ivy League-educated bureaucrats became the high priests, issuing unquestionable edicts from on high, and the public was expected to submit, obey, and show their literal digital vaccine passports to participate in society.
That's a terrifying picture.
When Fauci conflates his personal policy decisions with the abstract, immutable concept of science, he is claiming divine right. He is removing his actions from the messy, democratic realm of debate and placing them in the untouchable realm of absolute truth.
And Carlson's warning is that when science is corrupted into a tool for authoritarian control, it becomes a profoundly malignant force.
So up to this point, we have this sweeping macro-level critique, right? We've looked at the bureaucratic arrogance, the media complicity, the diaries, and the philosophical corruption of science.
All very high-altitude stuff.
Exactly. But halfway through the transcript, the focus pivots completely. We leave the high-altitude theory and go straight down to the ground floor. We go inside the clinic.
And this is where Dr. Bowden comes in.
The second half of this source material is an extensive interview with Dr. Talley Bowden.
Yes, and structurally, Dr. Bowden is introduced as the exact foil to Anthony Fauci. Well, Fauci is the ultimate insider bureaucrat who hasn't actively treated a patient in a clinical setting in decades. Dr. Bowden is an ear, nose, and throat and sleep medicine specialist running a private practice in Houston. She is in the trenches.
She's seeing people face to face.
She is actively seeing patients every single day. The transcript presents her as the true dissident physician, the doctor who actually applied the scientific method of observation, noticed a terrifying pattern, spoke out against the mandates, and was brutally punished by the establishment for doing so.
And the claims she makes about what she is observing in her clinic are highly specific and deeply alarming.
What's she seeing?
She states unequivocally that she is seeing patients almost daily whose lives have been completely destroyed by the mRNA shots. If the bureaucratic shield at the top is as impenetrable as Carlson claims, Dr. Bowden's clinical experience is what happens when a doctor at the bottom tries to pierce it.
We really need to explore the exact biological mechanisms she is talking about, because her observations form the entire foundation of her dissent.
All right, the transcript details a very specific shift in the types of injuries she claims to be seeing. Early on, the debate around vaccine injuries focused heavily on acute, immediate issues, things like severe allergic reactions, sudden strokes, or acute myocarditis, which is the inflammation of the heart muscle.
Yeah, the stuff that happens right after the shot.
But Dr. Bowden says that is no longer the primary pattern. Instead, she's documenting a cluster of chronic, grinding, debilitating conditions that destroy a patient's quality of life over time. She mentions severe, unexplainable chronic fatigue, and she zeroes in specifically on POTS.
POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I've seen this mentioned more and more.
Yeah, it's getting a lot of attention. What exactly is happening in the body when someone has POTS?
Okay, so it's a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. Normally, when you stand up, gravity pulls your blood down. Your autonomic nervous system instantly kicks in, constricting your blood vessels and increasing your heart rate slightly to ensure blood keeps pumping to your brain.
Right, so you don't faint.
It happens automatically. You don't even think about it. But in a patient with POTS, that automatic communication breaks down. The blood vessels don't constrict properly.
So what happens to the blood?
Blood pools in the lower body, and the heart starts racing erratically tachycardia, trying desperately to compensate. Dr. Bowden describes patients experiencing terrifying erratic shifts in their blood pressure and pulse with no obvious trigger.
Just from standing up.
Just from moving around. She says it can be so severe that previously healthy people literally cannot get out of bed without passing out or feeling incredibly ill.
And POTS is just one piece of the puzzle. She also details a range of neurological injuries.
Like what?
She talks about patients with sudden tremors, uncontrollable shaking, and severe neuropathy, which is nerve damage that usually causes numbness, tingling, or burning pain, often in the hands and feet.
That sounds awful.
She even mentions unusual stubborn rashes that refuse to respond to standard dermatological treatments like steroids or antihistamines.
Yeah.
But she doesn't just list symptoms. She provides a physiological theory for why all of this is happening.
Okay, what's her theory?
She points a finger directly at the spike protein.
This is where the medical claims get highly technical. The fundamental mechanism of the mRNA vaccines is to instruct your body's cells to produce a piece of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the spike protein.
Right, to train the immune system.
The theory was that your immune system would recognize this foreign protein, build antibodies, and then clear it out. But Dr. Bowden claims that researchers and dissident doctors are finding that the spike protein is not quickly cleared.
It stays in the body.
Instead, she alleges it is causing the formation of what she calls amyloid-like proteins in the blood.
Oh yeah, let's break that down. What is an amyloid, and why is it dangerous if it's in your bloodstream?
An amyloid is essentially an abnormally folded protein. Proteins are complex molecules that have to fold into very specific, precise 3D shapes to function correctly in the body.
And if they don't fold right?
If a protein misfolds, it becomes useless. And worse, it becomes sticky. These misfolded proteins clump together into amyloid fibrils.
Sticky clumps in the blood.
Exactly. The body's normal waste disposal systems really struggle to break down these clumps. Dr. Bowden theorizes that the spike protein is triggering these amyloid formations, which then interact with the endothelial cells, the lining of the blood vessels, causing widespread microclotting.
Microclotting. So we aren't necessarily talking about massive fatal blood clots like a pulmonary embolism that kills you instantly. We are talking about microscopic blockages.
Exactly. Microclots are tiny, but if you have millions of them, they essentially act like sludge in the pipes.
Oh, wow.
They clog the capillaries, which are the smallest blood vessels responsible for delivering oxygen and nutrients to your tissues and organs.
Your body is basically starving for oxygen.
Dr. Bowden theorizes that this systemic lack of proper blood flow and oxygenation on a cellular level is the root cause of the severe brain fog, the chronic fatigue, and the nerve damage she is treating. The organs are essentially suffocating at a microscopic level.
And it claims escalate from there, moving from the microscopic to macro-level population data. She touches on fertility, stating that the data analysts and doctors she trusts are highly concerned about negative impacts on reproductive health.
That's a huge claim.
But the biggest, most explosive macro claim she makes involves cancer data.
Yes. She alleges that the CDC, the premier public health agency in the country, is actively withholding, or at best, inexplicably dragging its feet on releasing comprehensive current cancer data to the public.
Why would they do that?
She states that the last full batch of accessible data only goes up to 2023, and that the data they do have shows a disturbing rise in specific tumors, particularly in younger patients under the age of 50.
Like turbo cancers, they call them?
Yep. Right. To bolster this, she points to indirect economic indicators, like rapidly rising expenditures on chemotherapy drugs and cancer treatments, suggesting a massive spike in cancer rates that followed the rollout of the vaccines.
So the financial data points to a health crisis.
Her overriding frustration is logistical. We live in an era of instantaneous electronic medical records, advanced AI, and big data. The idea that the CDC cannot produce real-time, transparent data to reassure the public is, to her, evidence of a cover-up.
Which brings up a massive, glaring question. If a practicing board-certified physician is seeing this distinct cluster of symptoms, POTS, neuropathy, microclotting, and she suspects the mechanism is the spike protein, how does the medical establishment handle her reports?
Right. What does the FDA do?
Exactly. How does the FDA respond? Because her argument is that they aren't just slow. They are actively ignoring the injured.
This raises an important question, right? To explain how broken the current system is, Dr. Bowden contrasts it with how the system is supposed to work, citing the historical example of Vioxx.
Oh, I remember Vioxx.
Vioxx was a massively popular painkiller approved by the FDA in 1999. But over time, post-market surveillance showed it was causing a significant increase in severe cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes.
And eventually, it got pulled.
The system eventually worked, the data couldn't be ignored, and the drug was pulled from the market in 2004. Dr. Bowden's point is that the threshold for pulling a drug when it shows unanticipated harmful side effects used to be relatively low.
But not anymore.
But with the COVID-19 mRNA shots, she argues that standard has been entirely abandoned. She claims there is a blatant disregard for really, truly awful, harmful side effects, and that the government agencies have effectively abandoned millions of injured patients to protect the reputation of the product.
Wait, if this is as bad as the source claims, if millions of people are suffering from microclots, debilitating fatigue, and skyrocketing cancer rates, why are political figures on both the right and the left ignoring it?
It's a great point.
You would think a crisis of this magnitude would be a massive bipartisan rallying cry, an easy political victory for whoever exposes it. Yet, as Carlson points out in the interview, politicians who normally seize on populist outrage are incredibly quiet about mRNA injuries.
The transcript dives into some very cynical but fascinating political speculation to explain this bipartisan silence.
Okay, let's hear the theories.
Dr. Bowden points her finger at leadership on both sides, starting with Donald Trump. She notes that Trump continually praises Operation Warp Speed as one of the crowning achievements of his presidency. He views the rapid development of the vaccine as a historic logistical triumph.
So he's tied to it.
Dr. Bowden's theory is that Trump's ego is completely tethered to that success. To admit that the product of warp speed is fundamentally flawed or causing widespread harm would require him to admit a massive personal failure.
And he just can't do that.
Politically and psychologically, she argues, he simply cannot do it. He is trapped by his own victory.
Okay, ego explains Trump. But what about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr., literally built a massive political following and a presidential campaign by being the loudest critic of the pharmaceutical industry?
He literally wrote a book on Fauci.
He wrote a best-selling book aggressively attacking Anthony Fauci. So Carlson asked the obvious question. Why has RFK Jr. gone relatively quiet on the specific issue of mRNA toxicity recently?
Dr. Bowden offers a theory, and she prefaces it by admitting it is pure speculation based on her observation of his network.
What's the speculation?
She suggests RFK Jr. has made a cold, strategic political calculation. She notes that his core base, his primary loyalty for decades, has been what she calls the autism mothers, the movement focused on revamping the entire childhood vaccine schedule.
So that's his real goal.
Her theory is that RFK Jr. realizes that if he aggressively and exclusively attacks the COVID mRNA shots right now, the establishment will completely marginalize him. They will fire him from any position of influence in a potential future administration.
So he's playing the long game.
So he is purposefully softening his stance on mRNA to maintain political viability, hoping to secure enough power to achieve his ultimate long-term goal regarding the childhood schedule.
It is a devastatingly cynical view of Washington. It suggests that vanity, ego, and political triangulation are actively preventing the most powerful people in the country from addressing a catastrophic public health crisis.
It's pretty bleak.
Which leads us to the final and, frankly, the most disturbing segment of this deep dive. If the politicians are paralyzed by ego and the federal agencies are complicit, why hasn't the legal system stepped in?
Right. Where are the courts?
Why haven't the courts stopped this? What is the actual barrier to accountability?
The transcript identifies two distinct, massive barriers: an impenetrable legal shield and a profound cultural shift within the practice of medicine itself.
Let's tackle the legal shield first.
Let's do it, because it is the structural foundation of the entire issue. Dr. Bowden explicitly names the PPART Act.
The PPREP.
The Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act. It was originally passed in 2005. It grants the Secretary of Health and Human Services the power to issue a declaration that provides broad immunity from liability to entities involved in the development, manufacture, testing, distribution, and administration of medical countermeasures during a declared public health emergency.
Okay, break that down for me. What does broad immunity actually mean in practice? If I take a drug and it severely injures me, I can usually sue the manufacturer for negligence, right?
Normally, yes. But under a Pure Prep Act declaration, you cannot. It gives pharmaceutical companies, distributors, and even the hospitals administering the shots what Bowden calls a blanket immunity.
So they are totally untouchable.
You cannot sue them for negligence. You cannot sue them for failure to warn. You cannot sue them for design defects.
Is there any exception?
The only exception baked into the PRP Act is for willful misconduct. But the legal standard to prove willful misconduct is astronomically high, and you have to try the case in a very specific, restricted federal court setup in Washington, D.C.
So it's basically impossible.
For the average citizen, or even a well-funded law firm, it is practically impossible to pierce that shield. The pharmaceutical companies essentially assumed zero financial risk for rolling out the mRNA shots.
But the transcript does mention a couple of attempts to find loopholes in that legal shield, though the outcomes they describe are incredibly bleak. They specifically discuss two lawsuits. The first is the case of Brooke Jackson.
Right. Brooke Jackson's case is fascinating. According to the transcript, she wasn't a patient. She was a clinical trial auditor.
An insider.
She worked for a contractor overseeing the clinical trials for the Pfizer vaccine. She allegedly witnessed massive violations of research protocols, falsified data, unblinded patients, inadequately trained vaccinators.
And she reported it.
She says she reported these violations to the FDA and was fired almost immediately. She then filed a massive fraud lawsuit against Pfizer under the False Claims Act.
Fraud.
The logic was, you can't use the PRP Act to shield yourself if the data you used to get the authorization was fraudulent to begin with.
A classic whistleblower case. But what happened?
The transcript claims that the United States Department of Justice, the federal government itself, actively intervened in the lawsuit, not to support the whistleblower, but to file motions to dismiss the case on behalf of Pfizer.
Wait, really? the DOJ.
Carlson is visibly flabbergasted by this. He asks why on earth the DOJ would step in to protect a massive, historically profitable pharmaceutical corporation from having to answer to fraud allegations in discovery.
That is insane. And the second case is equally disturbing, and it involves a different legal strategy. They talk about a physician's assistant named Deb Conrad.
Right, Deb Conrad. She worked at a hospital in New York. According to the source, she realized that the healthcare providers who were administering the COVID shots had signed contracts with the government.
Contracts to do what?
Those contracts explicitly obligated them to report potential adverse reactions to VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. Conrad began rigorously reporting the injuries she was seeing in the hospital to VAERS.
Just doing her job.
The transcript claims she was fired simply because she was reporting too many cases. So she sued the hospital, not for vaccine injury, but for breach of contract.
That's a clever workaround.
It's a very clever legal workaround to avoid the Prepay Act, she argued. You fired me for doing exactly what your contract with the federal government required you to do.
And let me guess, the DOJ stepped in again.
Exactly. Once again, the source alleges that the DOJ intervened and attempted to get Conrad's case dismissed.
Wow.
So if you take the narrative in this transcript at face value, the legal system is completely rigged. The pharmaceutical companies have statutory immunity via the PRP Act. And if a clever lawyer tries to use whistleblower statutes or breach of contract laws to force discovery and hold these entities accountable, the federal government swoops in to crush the lawsuit. It is an impenetrable fortress.
Okay, that explains the legal side. The lawyers are blocked. But what about the doctors? There are over 1 million practicing physicians in the United States. If the injuries are as widespread as Bowden claims, why aren't thousands of doctors speaking out? Why is she the anomaly?
This brings us to the cultural critique, which is arguably the most insidious and terrifying part of Bowden's argument.
The culture of medicine itself.
She describes modern academic medical training not as an environment that fosters rigorous scientific inquiry, but as an environment akin to the military.
Like boot camp.
She argues that doctors are conditioned from their first day of medical school to stay in your lane, to comply with the hierarchy, and to accept consensus dogma without question.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? If I can try an analogy here to explain what she means.
Sure, go ahead.
Modern medicine increasingly functions like an assembly line or maybe an algorithmic software program. If a doctor sees a patient with a novel vaccine injury, but that specific injury isn't pre-coded into the drop-down menu of their electronic medical record system, the system literally cannot process it.
It spits out an error code.
Exactly. The doctor is then forced to make a choice. Either override the software, stop the assembly line, trust their own eyes, and fight the hospital administration, or just keep the line moving, conform to the system, and tell the patient it's all in their head. Bowden claims doctors are blindly following government officials rather than practicing informed consent.
That is a perfect analogy for what Bowden is describing, and she adds a powerful social enforcement mechanism to that algorithmic compliance.
What's that?
She notes that the absolute worst thing you can be called in the medical profession is a quack.
Oh, yeah, that's a career ender.
That word carries immense career-ending professional shame. If you step out of line, if you question the CDC guidelines, you aren't just disagreed with, you are excommunicated. You lose your hospital privileges. You lose your board certification. You lose your ability to make a living.
She actually tells a story about presenting her clinical findings on microclotting and mRNA injuries to a group of mainstream established doctors. What was their reaction?
She says they simply didn't get it. They looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. They couldn't fathom why she would risk her lucrative career to stand up against the mandates.
Because it's not what they were trained to do.
The transcript uses this anecdote to argue that the medical profession has been fundamentally hollowed out from the inside. It is no longer populated by skeptical, curious scientists, fiercely dedicated to testing hypotheses and advocating for the individual patient.
What are they?
It is populated by compliant functionaries who are far more terrified of losing their social status and their paychecks than they are of harming the person sitting on the exam table.
It is a devastating, sweeping indictment of the entire healthcare ecosystem. Let's synthesize the massive journey we've just been on.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We started by looking at how Tucker Carlson built a narrative around the untouchable, insulated bureaucrat. We looked at Anthony Fauci's diaries and his invocation of the Fifth Amendment, and saw how Carlson used them to paint a picture not of a diabolical mastermind, but of an insecure, narcissistic manager shielded by a bloated system.
The banality of evil in action.
Exactly. We saw how that bureaucratic hubris clashed with street-level logical skepticism, leading to the dangerous authoritarian conflation of science with unquestionable obedience.
Right. I am science.
And finally, we went inside the clinic with Dr. Bowden, who mapped out the biological nightmares of POTS and microclotting while painting a picture of a medical system that is legally immunized from the harm it causes and culturally terrified of dissenting from the official narrative.
And that brings us to the ultimate stakes. Why does this matter to you?
Why should the listener care?
You might listen to this breakdown and conclude that Carlson and Bowden are brave truth-tellers exposing the greatest medical scandal in history. Or you might listen to this and think they are weaving disparate facts, political grievances, and biological speculations into a paranoid, dangerous narrative.
It's up to you to decide.
But regardless of your conclusion, you have to care about this document. Because if you are sitting in a doctor's office tomorrow with a complex, unexplainable symptom, Bowden's argument suggests that your doctor is both legally and culturally incentivized to ignore you.
That's the scary part.
This transcript perfectly encapsulates a profound and perhaps irreversible collapse of trust. When a massive segment of the population firmly believes that the regulatory agencies, the pharmaceutical giants, the media, and their own neighborhood doctors are operating in a coordinated effort to protect the system at the expense of the patient, the social contract is completely broken.
It's not just a disagreement over policy anymore, it's a crisis of legitimacy.
Precisely. And that leads to the final provocative thought I want to leave you with, something that builds on the terrifying reality described in this deep dive.
What's that?
If, as Dr. Bowden claims, modern medical training prioritizes blind compliance over rigorous skepticism, and if federal legislation like the PRP Act successfully removes all financial liability for pharmaceutical failures, and if the legacy media acts as a PR shield for bureaucrats rather than a vicious watchdog,
Right.
who exactly is left to act as the failsafe for the public? The next time a novel global crisis hits, whether it's a new pathogen, an environmental collapse, or a technological catastrophe, if the watchdogs are legally muzzled and culturally castrated, where does the everyday person turn for the truth?
Wow. That is a chilling question to leave hanging in the air.
Yeah.
If the architects of the crisis are immune from the fallout, who protects the rest of us left standing in the rubble? We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the consensus, keep analyzing the narratives being built around you, and as always, keep asking the hard questions. We'll see you next time.